There is a man who built his romantic taste the same way he built the rest of his life, deliberately. Nothing random, nothing messy, nothing that couldn't survive being photographed. He thought he wanted the woman in heels. The one who always knew the dress code before anybody told her. Perfect hair, perfect nails. A voice that never got too loud, the kind of femininity that looked expensive before you even knew what she was wearing. That was the woman he could picture beside him, and then somehow his mind got hijacked by you. You, walking around in sneakers like your feet have somewhere more important to be than inside uncomfortable shoes. You, disappearing into an oversized hoodie that probably wasn't chosen to make anybody stare at you. You, throwing your hair up because it was annoying you. You, sitting sideways in a chair that costs more than somebody's rent and asking him, completely seriously, if he's going to finish those fries. And he cannot explain why that moment stayed with him longer than entire evenings with women who looked exactly like the fantasy he spent years constructing. Because you weren't trying. That's the problem. You weren't trying to be mysterious. You weren't pretending not to care. You weren't running some strategy to make a powerful man chase you. You genuinely forgot there was supposed to be an audition. And for somebody whose life is filled with people presenting their most polished version the second he enters the room, that is psychologically dangerous. Because suddenly he is wondering whether he ever had a type at all. Maybe he had branding, maybe he knew what photographed well beside him, maybe he knew what his friends expected him to choose. But attraction? The kind that follows you home. The kind that makes a grown man sit alone in silence and replay the way somebody laughed at something stupid. That apparently looks nothing like what he planned. And look at the first card sitting here, the Four of Swords. I'm using this symbolically because this card is almost too perfect for the psychology we're talking about. This is the image of retreat, silence, mental suspension. Somebody stepping away from noise because their thoughts have become impossible to ignore, and that is exactly where this man is. Quiet, thinking, comparing, replaying, not because you've done something dramatic, because you did something much worse to a controlled person. You made him question himself. Okay, I had to get on here for this one because this reading is already ridiculous. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, subscribe if you're new, and stay with me, because the part he keeps replaying about you is not the part you would expect. It was the fries. I'm serious. Not the outfit. Not the way you looked when you walked into the room. Not some perfectly timed glance across the table. The fries. Specifically, the moment you reached over, took one off his plate like this was already a relationship with shared food privileges, and kept talking. You didn't ask. You barely looked at him. And apparently this man has been replaying that tiny act like there was classified information hidden inside it. Because look at what came out here, the rising sun. Reversed. And again, I'm using this symbolically, because this is interesting. A rising sun should be obvious, bright, impossible to miss, the kind of thing everybody turns toward. But reversed, the thing affecting him isn't the obvious thing, it isn't the polished entrance. It isn't the moment designed to make somebody look. It's something almost private in how ordinary it was. You took the fry. Your sleeve was probably halfway over your hand. You laughed at whatever you were saying. Maybe you were chewing while trying to finish the story, which, by the way, would absolutely destroy the elegant fantasy this man thought he had. And he loved it. That's what's bothering him. Because nothing about that moment asked for approval. There was no little pause afterward to see whether he found you cute. You weren't checking his face, you weren't managing his reaction. You were just there, comfortable enough to forget yourself for a second. And people do not forget themselves around this man. They remember who they're sitting with. They remember his position, his reputation, the room, the restaurant, who might be watching. They become aware of themselves. You became less aware. Do you understand how strange that probably felt to him? Because the Four of Swords had him sitting there replaying something, and now this reversed rising sun almost answers what it was. Not your most impressive moment, your least edited one. That's it, nothing seductive. And yet, something about watching you exist without constantly presenting yourself registered in his nervous system as intimacy, before his brain had permission to call it that. He didn't fall for a hoodie. That's too simple. He fell for what happened when you were wearing it. You relaxed. And then, without meaning to, you gave him permission to relax too. That may actually be the part he cannot stop thinking about. Because beautiful women are not rare in his world. Impressive women are not rare. People who know how to make an entrance, he has seen plenty. But somebody who makes him forget, for 5 minutes, that he is supposed to be impressive too? Oh, that is different. Because what he experienced around you may not have been excitement first. It may have been something much more dangerous, relief. And that word matters more than it sounds like it does. Because look at this, 8 of Pentacles, reversed, which is almost funny here because upright this is effort, practice, refinement. Working on something until every detail is right. Reversed, something stops being worked on so hard, and that is exactly what happens to him around you. He stops working on himself, not in the unhealthy sense. I mean, he stops performing the version of himself everybody else seems to require, because this man is used to walking into a room and watching the room adjust. People sit differently. Someone suddenly remembers better vocabulary. The person telling a story starts wondering whether the story sounds intelligent enough. Women who were laughing normally 2 seconds ago become a little more composed. Everybody edits, tiny adjustments, constantly, and he notices. Of course he notices. You don't get to whatever level this man has reached without becoming extremely good at reading people. He knows when somebody is impressed. He knows when somebody wants something. He knows when somebody has rehearsed being casual. And then there's you. He tells you some extremely serious story about a deal, a project, some ridiculous problem involving people with titles longer than their actual personalities, and halfway through, you look at him and go, "Okay, but have you eaten today?" Excuse me? That wasn't the response he was expecting. He was expecting admiration, insight, maybe a question that proved you understood how important the situation was. You noticed he looked tired. That's different. Or everybody is dressed like they're attending a private auction in Monaco, and here you come in sneakers, because apparently your ankles did not receive the memo, and somehow he's watching you more than anybody else. Not because you're disrespectful. You aren't. You understand who he is. You just don't treat who he is like a religious experience. There's a difference. You meet the person before you meet the resumes. And I think that's where this 8 of Pentacles reversed gets interesting. Because maybe his old type required effort from him too. Not just from the woman, he had to be the right man beside her, always composed, always impressive, always matching the picture. Maybe choosing somebody who fit perfectly into his world meant he never had to question the world itself. It all made sense, same rules, same presentation, same language, safe. And then you show up comfortable enough in yourself that suddenly he starts wondering why everybody is working so hard. Including him. That's why relief becomes attraction, because his body figured something out before his standards did. He can exhale around you. He can say the stupid thing. He can admit he doesn't know. He can be tired without immediately turning tiredness into another demonstration of competence. And now there's a new problem. Because once you've experienced somebody who makes all that effort disappear, you notice the effort everywhere else. He notices conversations that feel rehearsed. He notices laughter that arrives exactly when it's supposed to. He notices how quickly somebody looks around a room before deciding how to behave, and, without intending to, he compares it to you, your stupid joke, your sneakers, that half-covered hand inside the hoodie sleeve, the way you forgot to be impressed, and people who would have been perfectly his type 6 months ago are suddenly losing a competition they don't even know they're in. Worse? He couldn't explain why, without revealing far too much. Because what is he supposed to say? She's beautiful, she's intelligent, she's exactly the kind of woman I always said I wanted, but somebody else once laughed into her sleeve while trying not to choke on a French fry, and now apparently my brain has standards of its own. Sir. Good luck explaining that, and look at the card sitting here. Knight of Swords. Reversed. Symbolically, this is perfect, because this is somebody whose mind is moving faster than his ability to make sense of where it's going. The comparison isn't deliberate anymore, that's the issue. He could be sitting across from somebody who is objectively stunning. Perfect dress, perfect conversation, expensive perfume, everything technically correct. And suddenly his brain goes, "You smelled like shampoo, that's it, shampoo." Maybe whatever detergent was on that hoodie. Nothing remotely luxurious, and somehow the memory feels more intimate than the perfume in front of him. Then somebody reaches elegantly for a glass, and he remembers your sleeve covering half your hand while you were talking. Somebody says exactly the socially appropriate thing at exactly the appropriate moment, and he remembers you leaning toward him during something extremely serious and whispering a comment you absolutely should not have made, and him trying not to laugh. That is what is irritating him. Because these other women are not doing anything wrong, that's important. They may be smart, interesting, beautiful, completely genuine. This isn't about them failing, it's about his attraction, refusing to stay theoretical. Before you, he had a category, a certain look, a certain polish, a certain way of moving through his world, nice and organised. Then you became specific, your laugh, your shampoo, the exact face you make when somebody says something ridiculous. The way you push your sleeves up, and then somehow they're covering your hands again 10 minutes later. The thing you always order. The word you pronounce in a way he secretly finds adorable but would never admit, because then we'd have an entirely different problem. Specificity is dangerous, because you can replace a fantasy. You cannot easily replace details. And this reversed Knight of Swords feels like his mind trying to outrun that realization. He keeps telling himself you're not his usual type. Meanwhile, his usual type is being quietly rewritten using characteristics that belong suspiciously to you. Now casual looks good, now humour matters more. Now he notices whether somebody makes him comfortable, now he likes a little mess. Interesting. Very interesting, and apparently thinking about you from a distance has stopped being enough. Because he's started doing something almost embarrassing for a man who probably prides himself on being direct and efficient. He manufactures coincidences, tiny ones. A question he absolutely could have asked somebody else. A reason to walk past where you are. A message that technically has a purpose if anybody investigates. He'll stay 3 minutes longer. Circle back for something he forgot. Suddenly need your opinion on an issue that did not require your opinion yesterday. And every single time, he acts like ending up near you was completely accidental. Sure, and now look at this, strength, which is almost rude because this entire card is about controlled power. Not force, control. The ability to hold something powerful without letting it run the room. And apparently that is what this man is attempting to do with you. Badly. Because he'll find some reason to stay after the conversation is technically over. Everybody else leaves. He doesn't. Suddenly there is one more question. One more thing he just remembered. And somehow that one thing takes 12 minutes. Or he'll message you something he could have figured out in approximately 30 seconds by himself. This is a competent man. Let me emphasize that. He manages serious situations. He makes decisions people wait on. He can probably walk into chaos and immediately start organizing it. But asking you if you want coffee? Apparently we need a committee, a risk assessment, 3 possible interpretations of the word coffee, a contingency plan in case you say you're busy. Sir, send the text. And it gets even worse because he remembers things. Tiny things. You mentioned once that you don't like a certain drink. He remembers. You always choose the same snack. He remembers. You said something months ago about a place you wanted to try. And somehow that information has been preserved with greater accuracy than several matters he is actually paid to remember. Then, if you notice, he immediately makes it casual. Oh, I think you mentioned that. Think? No. You filed it. Different thing, but this strength card explains why he keeps minimizing it. He's trying to contain how visible he's becoming. Because rejection would be uncomfortable, yes, but I don't actually think rejection is the deepest fear here. Being seen is. You've gotten close enough to notice where the polished version ends. And prestige is very useful when you don't want anybody looking too closely underneath it. Then you smile at him a certain way, he forgets himself, gets warmer than he intended, and watch what happens next. He pulls it back. suddenly slightly more formal, slightly cooler, maybe even annoyingly normal, not because the warmth wasn't real, because it was too real. He caught himself. That's the difference. This doesn't feel like somebody calculating how to make you chase them. It feels like somebody realizing, halfway through a moment, oh, I'm showing her. And immediately putting the jacket back on emotionally. Meanwhile, the problem remains. Being around everybody else has started feeling predictable. Being around you feels rewarding, so he keeps coming back. Then trying to act like he didn't. Strength. Control. Containment. Except the more effort he puts into appearing unaffected, the more obvious it becomes that something is requiring all this control in the first place. And honestly, that brings us to the more interesting question. Not why he wants you. We understand that now. The interesting question is why being around you makes this extremely controlled grown man start behaving like somebody he thought he had outgrown. Outgrown, that's the word. Because look at this card, 7 of Wands, reversed. And symbolically, this feels like somebody getting tired of defending a position they no longer even believe in. Because this man has spent years becoming difficult to read, measured, appropriate, never too eager, never too available, never the person staring at his phone waiting for somebody to respond. Except apparently now he sends you something stupid at 11:17 at night. A meme. Something objectively ridiculous. And then puts his phone down like he does not care whether you find it. Funny, he cares. Deeply. Embarrassingly. He checks. Then you react with one laughing emoji and this grown man gets a completely unreasonable amount of satisfaction out of it. Sir, please maintain some dignity. Or maybe he gets a haircut. Nothing dramatic. Normally he would barely think about whether anybody noticed. But now you walk into the room and suddenly there is a tiny part of his brain going, "Did she see it?" You don't mention it immediately. He becomes annoyed. You mention it 20 minutes later. His entire mood improves. Ridiculous. And then there's the competitive thing. You challenge him at something meaningless. A game, trivia, bowling, whatever. Something with absolutely no consequences. And suddenly he needs to win. Not because winning matters, because teasing you afterward matters, because watching you accuse him of cheating matters, because for 10 minutes he isn't the person people defer to. He's just some guy trying to beat you at something stupid while you tell him he's taking it way too seriously. And maybe he is. But look at what disappears in those moments. The 7 of Wands reversed. The defense position. The constant sense that he has to hold his ground. Around you, he can drop it. And I think that is why this attraction feels strangely younger. Not childish. Younger, there's a difference. It's the version of him that used to get excited about things before everything had strategic value. The version who could like somebody without first asking whether the connection made sense on paper. The version who could smile at his phone during a meeting and then immediately straighten his face because somebody walked past. Oh, he hates that one. Because now he's easy to impress in ways he hasn't been for years. You tell him some obscure story about your childhood. He remembers it, weeks later. You recommend some random show. Suddenly he has watched 3 episodes. Just happened to put it on. Of course you did. And here's what I think is actually frightening him. Maybe he isn't losing himself around you. Maybe he's getting pieces of himself back. Pieces that ambition taught him were inefficient. Too soft, too unserious, too easy to hurt. And once somebody becomes connected to that version of you, they're not just attractive anymore. They're attached to a feeling of being alive in your own life. Which creates a much bigger problem. Because now he isn't only imagining seeing you again. He's started imagining you in places you have never been, the private ones, the parts of his life he normally keeps completely separate from romance. And that is where the 8 of Wands comes in, because this card is movement, momentum, something crossing the distance faster than expected, and symbolically that feels exactly like what his mind is doing. It is moving you into his life before he has consciously decided whether you belong there. Not the public life. That's the important part. Not the events, not the photographs. Not standing beside him, somewhere impressive, while everybody quietly decides whether you make sense together. I'm talking about Tuesday. Nothing happening. You barefoot in his kitchen opening the refrigerator and immediately looking offended. Do you actually eat food? Because apparently there are 6 bottles of expensive water, something imported that expired 3 months ago, and absolutely nothing a normal human being could turn into dinner, and he can see it, too clearly. Your hoodie thrown over the back of a chair he normally keeps completely clear. You falling asleep halfway through a movie that he insisted was incredible, then waking up during the credits and going, "It was good, you saw 14 minutes, please stop lying." Or you're sitting beside him while he runs some painfully ordinary errand, no event, no audience, nobody important, and somehow the image feels more intimate to him than anything overtly romantic. Because lust? He understands lust. Chemistry? Fine. He knows what to do with that. But imagining somebody inside the hours nobody photographs? That's different. The 8 of Wands feels like those images arriving before he can stop them. Fast. Uninvited. One after another. You meeting somebody whose opinion he genuinely respects. You knowing where things are in his home. You complaining about how cold he keeps the room. You having a favourite mug there. And then his old programming kicks in. Wait. She's not what I usually go for. Different presentation. Too casual. Maybe too unpredictable. Maybe she wouldn't fit into certain parts of my world. Sir, your imaginary version of this woman already has a mug in your cabinet. I think we're past the dress code. And that's the contradiction. Part of him loves the idea. Another part keeps trying to drag this connection back through standards that were created before you existed in his mind this way. But emotionally, he's ahead of himself, way ahead, and I think he may already be testing this, not dramatically, small things, letting you see him when he's tired, inviting you into a less polished setting, mentioning something personal and watching what you do with it, maybe showing you a part of his life that usually stays behind the curtain just to see whether your energy changes once you're closer to the reality of him. Because people often respond differently when the impressive person stops performing impressive. He knows that, so he gave you a glimpse, just enough. And your reaction? You did something so simple that he probably didn't even understand why it affected him until later. But whatever you did in that moment changed the entire way he was reading this connection. And here's what you did. You didn't make it a moment. That's the part. He showed you something slightly unpolished. Maybe he admitted he was exhausted. Maybe he mentioned something complicated about his family. Maybe you saw a room that wasn't perfectly arranged. A problem he hadn't solved yet. Some part of his life that didn't match the version people assume must be effortless. And you didn't lean in like you'd just been handed secret access. You didn't suddenly become softer in that exaggerated way people do when they want somebody to know they're being supportive. You just looked at him, asked one normal question, maybe said, "That sounds like a lot," and then kept treating him exactly the same. Look at this card. 9 of Swords. Reversed. Symbolically, this is interesting because upright, this is the mind at 3 in the morning. Worry, pressure. Things becoming enormous when you're alone with them. Reversed, something gets spoken, something comes out of the locked room in your head and survives being seen, and I think that's what happened. He gave you something small but real, and you didn't weaponize it, you didn't romanticize it either. That's important. Because sometimes people discover vulnerability in somebody powerful, and immediately start acting like they've uncovered the hidden prince trapped inside the castle. Please. You didn't do that. Maybe you made a tiny joke. Maybe you helped with something without making him feel incompetent for needing help. Maybe you disagreed with him. Actually, that could be part of it. He admits he's overwhelmed and you go, well, you also refuse to let anybody do anything for you, so... Excuse me? But you're right. And now he's looking at you like nobody warned him that emotional safety could be mildly annoying. Because that's the shift. Before, he thought you were refreshing, because you weren't impressed by the performance. Now he realises you might also be safe around what the performance was protecting. Those are 2 very different things. And suddenly all those ridiculous domestic images make more sense. The mug, the refrigerator, the hoodie on the chair. He isn't imagining you there because you would make the space look better. He's imagining you there because he suspects he wouldn't have to hide inside it, and that is where attraction becomes frightening. Because if you only want his image, Rejection bruises the ego. Fine. He knows how to survive that. But if you've seen the tired version, the uncertain version, the version that doesn't have an answer yet, and he lets himself care what you think of that man. Now we're somewhere else entirely. So naturally, being the emotionally efficient genius he apparently is, what does he feel tempted to do the second he realizes this actually matters? Pull away. And look at this. 5 of Wands, reversed, which is almost painfully accurate here, because symbolically this is conflict that somebody is trying to shut down. Not solve, shut down. He decides he's going to get himself together. Very mature, very reasonable. He'll stop reaching out so much. He'll keep the next conversation short. He'll answer your message later instead of immediately. Then he writes the response. Disprease it. Writes another one that sounds too interested. Disprease that. Writes something so professionally neutral you would think human resources reviewed it. Sends. Then stares at the phone. Excellent work. Very normal. Or maybe there was obvious flirting between you. Warmth. That moment where both people know something just happened, even though technically nobody said anything. And the next time you see him, good afternoon. Good afternoon? Sir, 2 days ago you were making fun of the way she orders coffee. Now we're conducting a quarterly review? That's the 5 of Wands reversed. He is trying to remove the conflict by removing himself from the situation. More work. More discipline. More distance. Back to normal. Except normal doesn't come back, that's the problem. Because distance was supposed to make you smaller in his mind. Instead, suddenly everything reminds him of you. Somebody walks past in sneakers. You. He sees a hoodie thrown over a chair. You. French fries arrive at a table, and now apparently potatoes have emotional significance. Ridiculous. A joke lands, and he automatically thinks about whether you would have laughed. Then he gets annoyed because you are not even there. And this is where I think something finally becomes impossible for him to deny. You did not fit the fantasy. You changed what the fantasy has to compete with. That's different, because wanting somebody who enhances your image is easy to understand. They look good beside you. They reinforce the story you've already decided to tell about your life. But wanting somebody who alters your inner life? Now the story itself has to change, and that is much harder, because you didn't simply become another option. You became the reference point. Comfort gets compared to you. Humour gets compared to you. Chemistry gets compared to you. Even silence gets compared to how silence feels when you're there. So he can keep telling himself you're probably not interested. He can keep deciding this is inconvenient. He can bury himself in work. He can become weirdly formal for 48 hours and congratulate himself on his excellent emotional management. But casual attraction does not reorganize a man's preferences while he's trying not to look. This has. And I think he knows that now. Maybe reluctantly. Maybe privately. Maybe with absolutely no idea what he's going to do about it. But he knows. Which means the real question at the end of this isn't whether you made him lose his type. It's what losing that type is forcing him to admit about the life he actually wants. And I think the answer is sitting right here. Last quarter moon. Reversed. Which, symbolically, is almost perfect for somebody who keeps trying to return to a version of his life that no longer fits the same way. Because the last quarter moon is about release. Letting something complete itself. Stopping the argument with what has already changed. Reversed, holding on. Trying to keep an old structure alive because at least you know how it works. And I think that's what he's been doing with this idea of his type. Because heels were never really about heels. Neither are the sneakers. The polished woman represented a life he understood. Beautiful, successful, controlled. Appropriate. Everything matched. Everything made sense from the outside, and he may still like those things. Let's be clear. This man did not suddenly wake up allergic to elegance because you wore a sweatshirt, please. He can still appreciate beauty, ambition, sophistication. All of it. The problem is that those things used to be enough to convince him something was right. Now they aren't, because you introduced another question. How does this person make me feel when nobody's watching? And that question has ruined several perfectly good theories. Because when he thinks about you, he isn't only thinking about attraction. He's thinking about ease. The version of himself who laughs too loudly. The version who sends something stupid because he knows you'll understand why it's funny. The version who can admit he's tired without immediately explaining how productive the day was. The version sitting across from you while you steal another fry like the first offence wasn't enough. Apparently we're repeat offenders now. And that takes us all the way back to the Four of Swords. The silence, the replaying. He went into that quiet thinking he needed to understand why you didn't fit the picture. And I think the uncomfortable truth he found is that maybe the picture was never the point. Maybe he spent years designing somebody who would look right beside his life. Then you came along and made him wonder whether he actually likes the life itself when he's living it that way. That's bigger, because heels versus hoodies sounds like a preference. This is not a preference. This is recognition. Recognition that intimacy may not arrive wearing the packaging you trained yourself to respect. Sometimes it arrives in sneakers, hair tied up badly, halfway inside an oversized hoodie, looking at the expensive room like it's just a room, looking at him like he's just a man, and asking whether he's going to finish those fries. I can't tell you what he will do with that realization. That's his part. But psychologically, he cannot unknow it now. He spent years choosing what looked right beside him. And somehow the person consuming his thoughts is the one who made him feel most like himself. Take what resonates. But this one? Yeah. He's in trouble.